Copa90 became a project that we pitched to YouTube, and we were pitching against David Beckham, FIFA, and so we didn't expect to win. And then they gave us the channel. Someone said years ago to me, Bitcoin is a revolutionary technology wrapped up in a get-rich-quick scheme. Everyone's terrified of AI, which is just a marketing term, really.
2, 1, roll it.
This is StoryCo, the podcast about the business of story and storytelling. I'm James Kirkham. Let's get into it. My guest today spent 20 years working out from the inside how the machinery of stories actually pays the people who make them. Then he tried to rewire it. Richard Welsh started in the development room at Studio Lambert. He co-founded Copa90 and put football on YouTube without any rights, which was either reckless or visionary, depending on who you asked at the time. Whilst there, he helped put faces in front of cameras you recognise now: Maya Jama, KSI, Tom Deacon, way before any of them had anything like the platforms they've got today. Richard's won awards for Who Killed Summer and You, Me and the Apocalypse, and in the last few years has been working on a question that runs underneath everything. Who should get paid when a story travels? And how do you make sure it's the people who made it rather than the company that owns the pipes? He's called AI the largest creative value extraction in human history. Every model trained on human intelligence that was never compensated, packaged into a corporate product and rented back to the people who generated it. His solution, Decent Partners, builds tools that share credit, share money, and share what a group of people actually know. It's the most generous idea we've had on the show. Richard Welsh, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to StoryCo. We always start each episode with 4 simple words. So if you don't mind, tell me a story.
So I'll take you back to 2009. I've been working on a project called Who Killed Summer. It was a kind of drama that played out in real time across social networks, and we ended up going on the road around Europe in this sort of kind of mad bus. Anyway, got very sick, and on the way home, kind of everyone else was celebrating, and I was like feeling worse and worse and worse. Anyway, long story short, I ended up in hospital, and I had a combination of C. difficile, which is it's like MRSA, and I was basically sort of bedridden in hospital at the hottest sort of time of year for 2 weeks. The diagnosis was you've got like ulcerative colitis, this sort of disease that you're going to have the rest of your life. Go back to work and you're going to have to say to your HR manager, sit near the toilet, basically. I mean, I don't want to fill in the blanks here, but basically this is not a great diagnosis. So I leave hospital in a wheelchair. My dad picks me up. And I remember the doctor consultant said, look, here's the sort of pamphlet. Here's what you have to do. You'll be taking drugs the rest of your life. And I was like, okay, went home, sort of had 3 months at home, pretty miserable. I started to research it, and I started to basically piece together this story over a period of time, stress and with eating badly and all this sort of stuff. I'd basically lost the diversity of my gut bacteria. And I then sort of treated myself as this weird experiment with all sorts of like slightly mad stuff from the internet, and eventually found a guy called Barry, who at this point he'd started a business called Simprove, which is now everywhere. Anyway, I became quite good friends with him, and this sort of mad story of like healing myself, I suddenly realized that the connection I had with him and with his brand and his like Simprove probiotics, in restoring my gut, I suddenly felt that I was more connected and had more of a kind of like understanding of like how everything in the world was sort of connected. And so so that's my sort of story.
I didn't know that. So full disclosure, I know you.
Yeah.
I would love to explain to the audience our lives work-wise. We've never worked together, but they've kind of crossed over many times. I've never known that story, but I want you to tell us a little bit about the start. You're a person at the moment who seems to be redesigning the entire systems of the society we're in for good. But I knew you originally as a guy working in TV and coming up with ideas. Take us back even before that. Was it the early noughties and 100 and something rejection letters? What happened in those earliest moments to get this career underway?
Well, I went to university. Didn't really want to go to university, but went to university. Didn't make it past the first year, so dropped out. Sort of like moseyed around, ended up getting a job after like a long while at a production company in Birmingham, and then just trying to get a job anywhere. I was sending out these letters, these CVs, and sending them to every production company, not even getting a response. I sort of realised that I was at the bottom of the queue, and I thought like I'm going to have to come up with a different like approach to maybe get like noticed. And so I think it was around Christmas. I can't remember what year this would have been, 2000. 2004, probably 2003. And so I thought, I've got to get noticed. So I got 4 chocolate advent calendars and took out the chocolates, and then behind the chocolate advent, where the days of the week were, I put like a word, and I think it wrote out something like, "I don't have a job. What I really want for Christmas is to work for you. Like, can you give me a chance?" And I sent it off to 4 companies, and 3 of them got back within 2 or 3 days. And anyway, I was invited down to London by a company called Hatrick. Hatrick are kind of fairly well known kind of comedy producers. And I arrived at the office, and I was pretty green behind the ears, if that's the right phrase. Right. And I walked into the office, and I said hello to the receptionist, and they said, I said, "Hi, I'm Richard." And they said, "Oh, they're all waiting for you upstairs." And I was like, and there's me, I think I was 19 or 20. I was like, okay, I wonder what this is. Like, 'cause you definitely don't have any sort of presumption that anyone's going to care about you.
Absolutely not.
And went up to the sort of like the boardroom, or the main meeting room, and there was like maybe 15, 20 people in there. And like, I walked in, and I'd like to say there was applause. I don't know if there was applause, but in my mind there was applause.
We'll go with it.
But everyone said, like, sorry, we wanted to meet the guy who came up with this idea. And so it was the producers of like, Have I Got News for You? Wow. And like all these producers of Father Ted, like all these famous shows. And like, there was a large group of people who were like, we thought this was one of the most creative things we've seen. And anyway, and so I was offered a job off the back of that on Have I Got News for You.
You were obviously good at ideas. Did you know quite how good at ideas you were prior to that moment?
I don't know.
Was that the great validator?
I think if I look back, I was okay at school. I was good at writing. Anytime there was a sort of like a chaotic, or there was unstructured time, shall we say, I was good at filling it with interesting things to do. That's interesting. So I even remember someone coming into school with a camera, like, and it would have been a really, really early camera. And I was like, okay, let's come up with this idea. Let's come up with this game. I was always keen to connect things and people, and like use play as a way to kind of do that. And I don't think I've really done anything differently in like 20, 30 years, really. And I think being connected to that feeling of, oh, this is interesting. I wonder how this connects to this, and can we get other people? Because really, play is the way people connect.
So I presume Hatrick offered you the job.
Yeah. That would have been a bad story if they hadn't.
They just took the idea, so that was fantastic. Yeah. Goodbye. But then you had an early career in production companies like them, and it was in development, right? You were coming up with ideas for TV?
Yeah, for TV. I did it for 4 or 5 different production companies. I just came up with ideas like all the time.
And these were big production companies, kind of famous shops of some of the biggest shows at the time.
Hatrick, I had a period working for Noel Edmonds. Like,
God bless Noel.
Tick some boxes. And then I was at RDF, and I was like developing projects there. Then I went to Endemol, and at the same time, I think the longer I'd spent at these production companies, the more I kind of came in with such a naive optimism of like, this is how stories come together, and this is how ideas happen. And
so
I pitched some ridiculous ideas, like,
thinking it will become a show next week.
Yeah. And I think there's part of that energy that does carry you through. And someone said to me once, what's a good idea? A good idea is one that happens. And so there was this kind of disconnect between like the creative process and actually kind of getting that to manifest into something that was quote unquote happening. Like, that was always, it became more and more interesting to me, not just like having ideas, but how ideas happen and how can you get ideas to happen. Like, had some documentaries commissioned, had some kind of terrible like reality shows I was involved with, but was always kind of wanting to kind of create stuff. And there was a point where I started making music videos with a friend, mostly because it was just like you didn't have to ask permission.
Yeah.
And during that process of making music videos, I ended up meeting a guy who was in a band called the Riff Raff, and they weren't a big band, but Alex, who's now actually running Clash magazine, so he's done all right. He was like, "Can you do us a video?" And me and my friend Tim at the time, we were doing stuff together. And I said, well, we could do a video, but like, there's this new social network called Bibo. There's a load of young people on it. Why don't we do something interesting? And we sort of came up with this idea, and the idea was to sort of have the band travel around the world. And the people at Bibo were interested in kind of like new ideas. They'd been selling this kind of like weird, like, we've got 50 million users, which now seems so tiny. But at that point, it was like, we've got this big audience, we can sell it to brands, la la la. And we got this offer from them that, like, bring your show, we'll give you the front page of Bibo. The front page of a social network even seems sort of slightly insane now.
Fantastic.
We had this big exposure, and they were selling us on this big exposure. And then after a week or 2 weeks, we had like 500 views or something like that. And I was like looking at this platform and going, okay, so the adults here are telling us this is how it works. And then I've got the like 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds who I've been sort of nominally chatting to and following their accounts. How have they got like 150,000 followers? They're like Kings of Leon and like Scouting for Girls Girls, I remember, were two of the big bands at that point. But then these like random groups of kids have got like 100,000, 200,000 followers. So I stopped talking to the adults and started talking more focused to the kids who were on the platform. And it turned out that Bibo had left the back end of their platform open. So what these kids were doing were basically scraping the profile IDs of all of the bands and creating bots. And again, in an era now where everyone's worried about bots, this is 2007. They were just creating these like very basic bots and then just auto-inviting the fans of Scouting for Girls or Kings of Leon to their own pages and then sort of networking it. And the kids had figured this out at 14 and the adults hadn't really figured it out. And I was like, well, they must know how this works. And they didn't. So I left anyway. Alex and I can't remember his name. There was a young 14-year-old lad who kind of, the two of them befriended each other and got on. I said, right, okay, we're going to try this thing, but let's not tell anyone because we don't want to get in trouble and we don't want to like raise suspicions if we grow so fast. Like the lesson of giving a lead singer of a rock band and a 14-year-old who's got the keys to like understanding a social network some free space and saying, please do this slowly, that it didn't really work. So we hit, and again, I'll forget the exact numbers, but it was something like 100,000, 200,000 subscribers of this page in about 2 weeks.
That's amazing.
And I was like, we're going to get rumbled. There's no way they're not going to know this. And what happened instead was they didn't ask any questions. They just assumed we'd figured out the platform, which we kind of had, better than anyone else. And what they cared more about was that 3 major record labels had suddenly seen this growth of this kid, of this band, the Riff Raff, and were like, well, can we get in touch? Can we sign the band? Anyway, long story short, the whole thing imploded. It never really happened. The band split up. But it was a kind of first experience on that level of this weird intersection of kind of community building, filmmaking, kind of social, like the technology stuff coming up. And this realization that if you could connect people with community, if you could build that into sort of like what had only really previously been like broadcasting had been able to do, you suddenly had like people giving you their attention, and suddenly the world that had previously been like this, oh, I've got to ask permission, or I'm in this pecking order, suddenly they were coming to you, and it was this sort of like, oh, maybe that's a good way of doing stuff.
So there's a stark contrast, a very exciting contrast from what you had been seeing inside the TV production companies. The likes of Studio Lambert are world renowned now, but of course there was a presumably very traditional hierarchy, and you've just described a fledgling social platform that you innately broke the system a little. So again, feels very symbolic to kind of where you went next. But I know both of us in our CVs and our backgrounds, we've got Copa90. You were at Big Balls Films that started it. So I was going to ask, from TV ideas, and it feels like that feels then the natural bridge to what became presumably far more digitally orientated, socially orientated concepts like Copa90 was. Would that be true?
Well, I think broadly it was nice to find a space where no one really knew what was going on. I think you mentioned the sort of like the stuff with TV production. It was a very formalized process. It was very well kind of capitalized, very well structured. And it was, I remember, like, if you're coming up with TV ideas, you'd come up with them in your groups, but then you'd pitch them to the sort of like the bosses, and then they'd have lunch with someone, or they'd be next door neighbors with whoever. And like, actually, that sort of seemed to me like a sort of system where like you were kind of like, you had to play the game. It didn't feel unfair. It just felt like it's like getting into a festival. Like you can queue up or you can go over the fence. Like, and like it's not like I ever jump over the fence in festivals, but like I've always sort of had that sensibility of there's always sort of like you can queue up with everyone else, or there's an alternative route. And I think the spaces that I've always felt more comfortable in have been the emerging, chaotic, yet to be defined kind of like spaces that then become the more defined platforms, but probably not for a decade.
When you were with the guys from Big Balls Films and you pitched a football show to YouTube, you did that with a different idea. Tell us about that concept and that process and what you learned maybe from that.
Well, I think it goes back even a bit further. Like that I knew there was something back to the Bibo thing, then the MySpace project I mentioned at the start. There was a sort of continuum of this is where the internet is going, and this is where media on the internet and this weird intersection between media, tech, and community building is kind of going. And the sort of natural step was then Facebook. We had a big project with Facebook that was called I Am Player, that was like a social game. And at the same time, you had YouTube kind of emerging. And it seems crazy now, but YouTube was not an obvious bet. And people like were quite sniffy. And there's a lot of time.
How did you feel about it?
Well, I thought again, it's like there's a portal being opened, and there's an interesting set of new tools, and there's something going on that isn't particularly well understood. And so I think I thought that that would be an interesting opportunity. I started speaking to the team in the US, and they started this thing called YouTube Originals. And YouTube Originals was a way at the time that YouTube wanted to effectively more mainstream what was quite a chaotic platform. And I remember reaching out at that point, and they said, wait, it's coming over to Europe, so maybe you guys can pitch. And we ended up kind of like with this opportunity where YouTube were aware that like football was this massive niche on the platform, but it was very sort of chaotic. Again, like there was no single space for it. We came to a sort of point where Copa90 became a project that we pitched to YouTube, and we were pitching against David Beckham, FIFA, like the big kind of like projects. I like to think about it as almost like asymmetric warfare. Like they were fighting with traditional tools and basically saying, we've got David Beckham, we've got like the rights to X, Y, and Z. And we didn't have any of that. But we did have this understanding of networks. We did have this social game that was kind of like doing really well at the time. And we had this weird intersecting experience between filmmaking, games, like working with like new digital talent and the sort of social networks that are kind of emerging. And so we didn't expect to win. And then they gave us the channel and a couple of $1 million, dollars, I can't remember now. Which was an advance against the kind of ad revenue they thought they'd make back. They didn't make any of that ad revenue back, but we were this sort of, in this first suite of 50 channels, I think, that launched in the UK, we were the biggest sort of project that was funded.
You'd come up with a concept that's effectively fan-centric storytelling where you're not even going to show a single kick of a single ball anywhere, ever, which is quite an original idea. But it's quite an egalitarian, for all, access for everyone philosophy behind it. Did that feel almost like vindication of what you'd been playing with, some of the early Bibo works?
I'd like to sort of take credit for that. It was just, a lot of the time you've got a limited set of resources.
Yeah.
And you're like,
so creativity from that level of
and I think
restraint.
that's more likely this creativity loves constraints.
I agree.
And actually, like I've been in a lot of companies where money was no object, and I've seen a lot of projects where money was no object. It doesn't mean that you're going to get like amazing things out of it.
It nearly always ends up pretty flabby, actually.
Yeah. So I think there was a sense that we had this limited set of resources. We had a bunch of young talent. There was just a group mentality at that point in that company where people were just excited to make stuff, and young people were like I don't know what the word is, celebrated, but there was no sort of parochial or kind of paternal kind of looking down on, well, you're at this level and you need to. There was a sort of sense of excitement at doing something different.
You brought Maya Jama onto the channel, who's now a really big presenter, certainly here in the UK. For a global audience, might know her less. Or KSI is arguably one of the richest young, multifaceted, multi-talented, multi-dimensional entrepreneurs on the planet right now. You found him when he was basically just playing FIFA games. Tell us what led you to do that.
Again, I think at that point there was a melting pot of talent within YouTube. We'd built a kind of like the sort of games business on Facebook, but there was this YouTube talent who were kind of bubbling up. And at that point, I think KSI must have had maybe 1 million subscribers, maybe like 750,000 subscribers. It was the learning that you can come with your kind of your sense of confidence and experience and like, well, we're professional filmmakers and we know what we're doing. But actually this is the same territory. This is the same experience of Bibo where the kids have been using it. They know how it works. And so I can't remember the exact connect to KSI. Actually, no, because we'd worked with him on the games business. And I think from an effectiveness perspective, we saw this insane take up in terms of how effective it was to basically work with this YouTuber in the early days, and how compared to what we thought was good filmmaking and like, we're going to make great content, we're going to make great stories and people will just come. And it didn't work like that at all. I feel like I'm dumbing myself down, but like I remember sitting down with KSI and his agent in the early days and basically sort of saying, I think you're doing this the wrong way. Like your channel, you should probably rein back on some of this stuff, because at the moment you're kind of like, and I remember looking back to this day, I was so wrong. And like, thank God he didn't, well, thank God, like he did what he did, but he was like who he is. And so
you could have been even bigger if you'd listened to
him. Exactly. So I think I've had a bunch of these moments in my career, which is, or whatever I call the thing I do, is where you're sort of forced to sort of reappraise how much you know.
That's a really nice point then. So that continual reappraisal, I can't imagine at the age I am now versus when I started a business at 23, and the sheer naivety and ignorance is what drives effectively that opening decade. But the notion of community and social and this talent in their early stages and how you connected them and how media was switching from kind of, hierarchical organizations to more, if you like, democratically brought together, community-led, etc. How do you see that? The years between, let's say, forming something like Copa90 to where we are now, is it chalk and cheese? Are we in a different stratosphere?
I think broadly, I think of it like a river delta. It's almost like the start of the kind of internet and the businesses that were built on top was almost this sort of like the top of a mountain where you've got this kind of like mad kind of rushing water and this sort of chaos. And like what we've just seen is this sort of like the spread of a river delta, and it's basically just expanded the flow system. That's what it is. That's what the internet is. That's what people operating in the across the internet are. It's a flow system, and so effectively those flows have just become deeper and wider, like closer, almost like a river getting closer to the sea.
So do you describe that with a positivity? We've lived through social, and maybe it got a bit too toxic and divided, but are we overthinking it? Should we be more positive?
Everything is like, this podcast, like everything's a story, and the dominant business model, not just of TV, not just of the internet, and not just of the sort of businesses that have been built on internet, has been profiting from separation. Like the tabloids, really, like it's about setting an agenda and like this against that, and really the infrastructure of the internet is about connection, and it has connected everyone. The businesses on top have really just made money from like creating differences. Like if you sort of looked at like the sediment that's sort of deposited, it's almost like we've got a reverse sedimentation happening. And like if you look into the ground, you see the sound at the top and then all the way down to the sort of harder stuff. The internet is almost the opposite of that.
People like me spend a lot of time talking about the 90s and nostalgia and all of that kind of nonsense, and I think it's very pertinent right now. I remember when I was still at university with a zip disk and a zip drive and a scanner, and our language would be, I'm now going to go on the internet, I'm going to go online. We would choose these distinct compartmentalized moments to spend time in an online environment. We were making whatever we wanted to cut through in the most artistic or creative or fun way possible. Now, that was still the internet. It was still tech-powered. Very creative time. Is it our relationship with it that we should query more?
Nothing's really changed. People feel that they're locked into systems that really are just businesses. Depending on who you talk to, there are people who say that the founding sort of like error of the internet and Tim Berners-Lee's vision for the World Wide Web was that there was no monetary layer built in. So therefore, because there was no way to monetize the sort of layer of the internet and the World Wide Web built on top, the hyperlinks that connected everything, because there was no sort of innate mechanism for value to pass through that, you ended up with there needing to be a business model. And everyone's very aware of that now, that Google, they invented one thing really, which was like PageRank. And PageRank was just a way to gauge the relationships between different websites and who referred who to. And then they built one of the world's biggest businesses on top of that. And like Facebook did the same. It's like that, but they're all kind of businesses that are built on top of the internet, or built on top of the networking layer. And so like if you create like a business layer that is effectively driven by kind of like profit comes at the point of division, and you're going to get what you get. Whereas the kind of the more interesting path has always been, and this is some of my sort of days at Copa90, were this idea that we were getting very good at building networks and we could build these big communities on the internet. And when you start asking those questions, you start to understand like questions of digital scarcity. The fact that, okay, so if you can just take a digital file and you can copy it infinitely, then obviously value just disappears. So this notion of digital scarcity, when I was sort of Copa90, I think I discovered like Bitcoin. I'd love to say I discovered it in the very first...
But it was back then. That's a long time ago.
Yeah. 2014 or something like that. I remember like someone in the office saying like, oh, there's this Vice article, we should try and do this, and I didn't. The Bitcoin thing for me was more like, oh, someone's come up with a solution or a technical approach to solve what is scarcity. So it wasn't like the money part that was interesting, especially to me. It was, there's an invention. There's an invention within Bitcoin, which is basically how to create provable digital scarcity in networks. And that was like a profound innovation that ultimately creates a new accounting system. No one wants to talk about accounting systems because it's not very exciting.
Sure.
But like people want to talk about things that will make you rich quick.
So to your point on the accusations of Tim Berners-Lee not building in a monetization layer, you were suddenly attracted to the fact that this is within, not on top of. You then got quite into that during the Web3 era, right?
I think the main thing I've tried to do, if I go all the way back, is like come up with ideas and get them to happen, and also help other people to have great ideas. And there's a project called Fall to the Floor that I was in, or one of a guy I knew we tried to hire at Copa90, and it was like this incredible sort of youth and music show that was on Channel 4. And I was like, surely you should have more of this. And it was highlighting young people. It was shot all across the UK. They were using incredible new technologies before anyone else was using it. And it just felt like, why is this lost on Channel 4 at sort of midnight? Why is this not more mainstream? And it was like the answer was the business model. It just didn't earn enough money. And so I think in my head I was like, well, there has to be a better way of funding things. This R&D part, the thing that effectively births all of the most interesting stuff in the creative industries, all comes from this fulcrum of kind of experimentation. And like we were born in an era where Channel 4, BBC, like they had money. They were a lot more kind of capable of taking risks than they are now. But those sort of institutions, they're analog institutions, and they are not capable of being network native. But I think the kind of move from there to the internet and then into the kind of crypto stuff was more like old money in my head. Old money knows too much. Like the systems are all in place.
That's the same point as earlier when you said the ideas were living or dying, predicated on the long lunch that happened with the executives afterwards. Same point.
Yeah.
So your experience within, I presume, again, a Web3 crypto world from a few years ago when we kind of re-met again after having not seen each other, presumably that was far more Viva la Revolution and pirate in you than anything else.
Oh, completely. It was old money knows too much, new money, like, okay, there's this entire new financial system emerging. And whether you call it Web3 or crypto or Bitcoin, all this sort of stuff, it was just, okay, there's something new again. There's something new that no one knows quite what it is.
So were you excited? Like you were...
well, I was curious. It was that feeling of like, there's something new here. And if you talk to 20 people, everyone will give you a different answer of what it is, which means no one knows what it is. There's a huge amount of hubris, like as in enormous amounts of confidence of how revolutionary this is going to be, which you hear whenever there's a new technology.
Did it feel very comparable to that kind of 2006 Bibo example or what became on MySpace? Did it feel similar?
Possibly. But I mean, I think at that point, like there was more naivety because I was just naturally younger.
Sure.
This felt like there was more of a compounding kind of change. Okay, there's a financial change here. And previously it had been a kind of media communications change. But it felt like suddenly there's this new rush of ideas, collision of worlds. This wasn't just like the advertising people and the TV people and the games people. You had the finance people. You had the kind of like the network infrastructure people. You had like philosophers, economists. You had this sort of, again, like an absorption of talent from across disciplines. And that, again, felt like a more interesting space because people had to dissolve the boundaries between what they thought they knew. And so I think that was what was most interesting.
So where we are today, in a not in your work, Bo, but the way, let's leap to Trump coin. Let's leap to anything that you might read, picking up any, frankly, broadsheet now. Does that feel unsurprising to what you were uncovering back then in terms of its trajectory and where it came?
No, because I mean, someone's said years ago to me, Bitcoin is a revolutionary technology wrapped up in a get-rich-quick scheme. If there's a new technology and there's a bunch of people who are unsure of kind of how it works and a huge amount of hope, and you've now got the ability to effectively create new currencies, new digital currencies, you're going to get an insane amount of speculation. It was almost like compounding layers in the same way we had the Cambridge Analytica stuff. Like you've got kind of in this emerging space, you've got like all sorts of like people, and you've got all sorts of incentives that basically will kind of encourage certain types of behavior. But I think what has been badly reported, simply because it doesn't sell newspapers, is that like there's a bunch of very interesting things happening at the same time as all the scams. And that's really what gets reported, is you have like the scams at one end, or you have the people making like unheard of money. And it's like people will hate both edges of that spectrum. And what gets lost is the sort of like the more interesting and more nuanced parts of like a change in technologies.
I certainly don't feel there was anything latently positive, or that perhaps is heading towards a word like decent, which comes onto your business now, but didn't feel like it was for the right reasons, put it that way.
Yeah.
Did that just get lost in the fog of the noise and the get rich quick scheme mentality, do you think?
Yeah.
Were there good people wanting to do good things?
Yeah, a lot, and a lot of people who are very, very mission driven. But money, like Tom Hanks once said, I think money doesn't change people; it just makes you more of who you are. And so I think there's a sort of, again, I think the pattern on this is it's a revealing that there's a lot of people who got very rich very quickly. And that will naturally change things. I think certain people get attracted to the kind of the curiosity side of stuff and the kind of new things, but also you end up with, like, when you throw a lot of money in a very unregulated space, you get an enormous amount of kind of grifting and all sorts of other stuff.
Do you think we're going to see an absolute deluge of the example of the Thai-based crypto billionaire funding of Farage that we're now starting to see in the news? Do you think that's tip of the iceberg?
Yeah, I think that's been going on a long time. And I think, again, I think what is happening is a revealing of how the systems of power have always worked. Like, Bitcoin famously talks about it is a digital central bank. Like, before Bitcoin, no 21-year-old man would have cared about how the central bank of any country worked. So, like, how is it that, like, this technology has educated by stealth and has made people care about how money's made? So it's no different to, like, people caring about, like, how their food, where their food comes from, how their clothes are made. We're just getting to the sort of this sediment of, like, oh, actually, how does money get made? Who makes the money? Like, how is the system controlled? And so if you've got...
So there's mass financial literacy that's improved as a result of querying why Bitcoin...
And it's not just financial literacy. What's more interesting, and again, is sort of at this underlying layer, is it's the systems of belief that create the conditions for money to exist.
Your point of being everything's a story.
Everything's a story, yeah. And so Bitcoin is just a story, but wrapped up in that story is a technical development, but it was made famous and became powerful by the story that people projected onto it.
Do you think that's both why we struggle and why it's successful? Is that part of it? Is that selling it to me and the reason it still accrues value?
Yeah, it's a network effect, and stories are just network effects. Like, and the more persistent the story is, the more it's shared, the more it kind of hardens back to the sediment structure. And so Bitcoin is just a story that found the right place at the right time. It's post 2008. People were looking for a solution, but Bitcoin wasn't the first attempt. It was a bunch of different things that were pushed together and pieced together with a story, with a timing, and it kind of picked up interest within specific kind of hacker groups. That opened a door, and because something was now possible, like, that brought in more people. And then you had this weird mix of kind of, like, again, narrative being built by the people who were there early, who held some Bitcoin. And so it starts to become what everyone says is a Ponzi. I mean, the trouble is with, when you look at a Ponzi, like, anything that is built around a social system is itself, like, held together by a social construct, by the fact that everyone, it exists because everyone believes it exists.
What's the difference between carving out a piece of copper and saying this is actually worth this? Is everyone called to believe that?
Yeah.
Great, well, that's now a currency.
It's a mark. It's a trademark. Like, that's where marks came from.
Let's segue then to your very business now is named Decent Partners. Is there something there that is related to that?
I set up the company 2016 after I'd left Copa90. There was a simple idea was, I'm going to set up a company because I just have to set up a company because I need some vehicle, but I want to create a network. The open questions I had the whole time were, like, what would a company that was a network that had value and values baked in to the network, how would that work? At the same time, we'd had some consultancy at the BBC a few years before, and the BBC had asked us, their strategy team, how could we be more like Big Balls? How could we be more like a company? And quite a lot of people were, like, very like, wow, like, isn't that a great thing? And I just felt a bit sad. And
why?
I thought because it was just like, again, it was just like an institution that isn't going to change, or not isn't going to change. There's lots of willing people, there's lots of energy, but it's like there's a sort of a life cycle. There's a sort of maturing. I think businesses, and we like to think that there are companies, and then there is nature, and then there is people. But actually, they're all the same sort of system. They're all organisms. They all exist on this sort of continuum. And, like, the BBC and these institutions are at a kind of, like, they're aging. They are at the tail end of their lives. They're not in the youthful, exuberant part. They're not in the experimental part. And what is needed at a point when you have this shifting of value and you have effectively in this country and around the world, everyone's kind of very aware of it, that there is a huge amount of inequality. And you can either choose to redistribute wealth, which there's a lot of people talking about that at the moment. You can tax people, you can do all this sort of stuff. That's a sort of redistribution of the existing resources. Or you have to create new wealth. And like for me, when the BBC was created, the thing we talk about as the creative industries didn't exist. It's like the idea of the UK exporting out soft power as storytelling didn't really exist. And so there's just almost like a natural feeling that if you start a network and you can build a network where you can create value within the network, if you can allow contribution to be kind of dissipated through the network as it grows, you're not building something on the network, you're building something through the network, then really it's just taking the existing talent, the existing ideas, and making it more natural, making it more honest, really, to the way that people actually work, rather than kind of creating a network and then layering on a business. It was like, how do I kind of achieve that? 10 years that I've been sort of running that experiment.
Do you see it as an experiment?
Yeah, because everyone asks me what it is.
Will the experiment ever end in that respect?
Well, I think it is at a point now where a lot of the things that I thought was going to happen are happening. Like blockchains are effectively infrastructure for humans to coordinate, and agents now. They're digital native, and they enable kind of value to be passed through networks in a way that wasn't possible with the internet when it was created. One of the first things that everyone sort of like within payments, like if you're going to get paid in a currency, you would hope that the currency doesn't go up and down like a lot in the time that you're getting paid. So a stable coin is a regular pound, dollar, euro that's pegged to a token which exists on the blockchain, and at somewhere there is a dollar, or supposedly there's a dollar or a euro or a pound in a bank account somewhere. So effectively you're having the existing financial system mirrored on these new financial rails. And so we launched,
and they're getting quite a lot of noise right now.
A lot of people's exposure to Tether have been through the kind of political machinations of Christopher Harborne and kind of his funding of Farage. But Tether is, I think, by all accounts, the world's most profitable per person business.
Wow,
and
really?
So, and their business model has been very simple, which is they have become the kind of de facto currency that everyone uses to trade cryptocurrencies. So if you're moving from Trump coin to Bitcoin to Ethereum or whatever, you would want to have something stable. You couldn't have traditional fiat currencies there, so you'd have like a token that is pegged to a dollar, and there's a dollar in a bank account somewhere. And Tether made their money, or make their money, from basically the reserves of dollars in a bank account, which is generally offshore. And so they'd make 4.5%, 5% on every dollar in their bank, and so they're making billions of profit every quarter.
Gosh.
And so that is now in America being mainstreamed by Donald Trump and various other people.
So that's completely legit. There's no problem with it.
Yeah.
Other than the fact that it seems a phenomenal scheme to be running. And for you, within Decent Barners, it was important, therefore, that was underpinning everything, and people to understand value, and there was no hierarchical decision making on such value. Would that be right too?
Yeah. We, with Decent, the aim was to create a stable coin that recirculated the value that was created in a way to the community that created it. And so if you're within Decent Partners, if you're a project that is funded or commissioned like within this model, the value that would previously have been extracted gets recirculated to the network that built it.
It's a community owned in that respect, always.
Yeah,
Community first, community driven, community owned.
Yeah.
With no kind of hierarchical play.
There's three things that I have now that I think make up what will become the organizational structure of almost every business moving forward. And that's currency, credit, and context. And currency is going to be the payments that you do within your network and the value that stays within that, and that you're going to see creative businesses effectively remove the kind of monopoly power of Visa, MasterCard, and businesses like that. You're going to see that disintermediation. Over the next 3 to 5 years, I think it's going to happen quite slowly and then very fast. There's the thing that latched onto me a while ago is this idea that with MP3s, music had its format moment with the internet. And banks are now about to have that format. So the financial infrastructure, so in the same way that the internet is effectively building up sediment from the networking layer up and is effectively sort of almost dissolving what we think of as the systems of power and control. It's eating away at the kind of systems that were music and culture, and then next is banking, and politics is above that. You see the same pattern playing out everywhere. It's like what happened to publishers is going to happen, and happen to music businesses is going to happen to banks and political parties. And so the political parties at the moment in this country, we've got Labour and Conservatives. They're like the BBC and ITV. Like you've then had like the cable era, which is basically the Green Party and Reform and whatever. They're different, but it's like, let's take a political party and add Twitter. That's what they are. And I think the stage after that is what's going to be the equivalent of seeing like almost like YouTube, which is where this mass proliferation of much more fluid kind of policy led, and like people aren't joining a party, they're joining something where they are passionate about an issue, and then those issues will end up getting packaged up into more kind of like more liquid democracy. And everyone's terrified of AI, which is just a marketing term really. But what AI is, well, because like AI means so many different things. It's like saying media, it's like saying like advertising. It's like, what do you mean? Like, and so AI is a bunch of things. It's a bunch of companies who've created these tools.
I mean, gosh, I don't know how we've got this far into a conversation, and this might be the first mention of AI. I think I've read before that you said you call it more aggregated human intelligence. Just explain the difference to, frankly, ignorant people like me.
Well, the amazing thing that the technology that produces this new tool has done is it's learned the way that by reading and by ingesting all sorts of information, it understands the underlying connection between concepts and words. It's not actually really just thinking about what's the next word. It's actually understanding at a deeper level the kind of like the network that gives context to, like, in a sentence, why one word would be next to another word. And so that's an incredible like technology to reason across any subject. And so actually it's a translation tool. And if we're in a world where everyone is divided and everyone talks past each other, and like I said earlier, you've ended up with just businesses that profit from division because it's easy to separate people into boxes and say you're this person, you're this person. What AI is, or what the technology, just like Bitcoin is an accounting innovation, really AI is a translation innovation. And actually it allows you to think across languages. It allows you to think between like coding and like French. Like it moves across all these different dimensions. And really what it's able to do is fill in the gaps between people. And so actually this idea of AI being a kind of like terrifying thing that's going to kind of like destroy the world, it's the same as like anything that like a technology could be used for good and bad. It doesn't mean that you should dismiss, which I think people tend to do, is you dismiss out of hand an innovation. And so the idea that you can have a technology that allows for translation between people, that allows them to see their similarities rather than their differences, that like helps glue together concepts which you couldn't previously see the connections to. And I think really what it is a fascinating philosophical layer that's actually closer to intuition than it is to intelligence. My path of like going, oh, this is curious, I'm interested, I'm going to follow this journey, that's intuition. That's that's below the level of rationality and thinking. But there's something there that's a very old and a very kind of a thing that we've lost trust in, because we trust experts or we trust scientists or whatever. But there's something about us, our understanding of the world, that we are building this story. We are building society. We are all a part of this web that creates the world we live in. They've created a new technology which has like allowed for that, like the kind of the understanding at a computational level between subjects and in between the gaps of information. But at the moment, that's all been scraped, and that reasoning has basically been extracted into large companies and then sold back to us as intelligence. But the intelligence is ours. There's nothing artificial or there's nothing alien about it. It's just our intelligence that in aggregate creates this incredible translation tool. The basic idea with decent partners is that if you've got large groups of people who are super creative, then if you can record that process, and this is the other amazing thing about the technology of artificial intelligence that people forget, is that the stuff that's been thrown away, the stuff that is the process, everyone knows with coming up with ideas that you have the TV show, you have the album, you have these end products. That is the creative industries, and we've understood that as the creative industries. That is creativity. It's not. It's the tip of the top of like what is a very like deep layering of people going in bad, like I don't know what, like you're reasoning in this direction, you've had a project that's failed over there. That reasoning is how the large language models have learned to figure out how creative process works.
I mean, you've evolved and expanded describing what AI really is, but that feels like you're also explaining at exactly the same time decent partners and the future of the project. It's social mobility in its truest, most perfect sense. It's underpinned with a system that is fair. That feels... Is that utopia?
I think it's more resilience. I think that any system that grows in a big tower is fragile. Like we have very fragile systems at the moment. And the more you can end up with a network that is smaller nodes that are kind of more kind of like balanced, in the same way you have this gradual devolution of kind of political parties and like the country, that you want local intelligence. Like if you take any area of any country, there's going to be local knowledge that's like there that is not necessarily accessible because it's hidden away in filing systems, it's hidden away in like letters and like council meetings. Like the fact is that when you start to be able to see and understand the context that everyone exists in, you are going to get a much more collegiate and a much better way for people to understand each other. And if you can do that at the same time where value isn't just extracted into these large companies, like we understand that intelligence is the source of all value that is then creating the creative industries. If that intelligence can have watermarked provenance, if it can be coordinated in such a way that people are able to access the intelligence in there, that they're surfacing the intelligence that already existed, they just didn't know it was there. And then that can be networked in a way where you're building this aggregate intelligence that is not a central company in the middle of it. It's not like another Google or another Netflix. It's like a diaspora, is that the right word? Of intelligences that interoperate with each other and can be relevant, well, that can almost be modular.
So do you worry less about the state of things now because you can see the future seemingly quite clearly around the corner?
It depends, I think, on a worldview. Like people worry that the world is changing, but the world has always been changing. Like every single day we are a different set of cells that we were the day before. So the kind of notion that change is happening, you can be frightened by it or you can be accepting of it. They always say the light is darkest before the dawn. I think, again, we have a media environment that is unfortunately built around attention, and therefore you're always going to get the worst and you're going to get like the extremes. And actually, people are ingenious. Like people are incredibly resourceful. And the fact is that every system ever, whether you see it as the kind of political system, the natural order of how we produce our food, all of that is always in a constant state of flux. But you need to have these slight cliff edges before the old system moves over and the new system comes up.
I love that. Richard, it's been such a pleasure. It's been an education. You've got me thinking. There's so much there to take away. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being a part of StoryCo.
No worries, thanks.
If you enjoyed this week's show, please follow us on Instagram @StoryCoPod. Subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. It really does help. StoryCo is a Telltale Industries production, recorded in Studio One at the brilliant TYX Studios in King's Cross. Produced by Jago Lee, assistant produced by Nellie Batt, edited by Ryan O'Meara. Special thanks to Craig Heptonstall, Jack Freegard, Tyler Newton, and Issa Gibson. I'm James Kirkham. This has been a masterclass in how storytelling pays in this modern media landscape. Go out, tell a story that matters. We'll see you next week.